Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Tell Me I'm Wrong. So in today's podcast, we are going to be discussing a somewhat uncomfortable topic for many people. It has to do with AI. Spoiler alert.
Uh-oh.
Wah, wah. Enough horsing around. We're going to be talking about if machines can think. And, we're not just talking about if, ChatGPT can spit out regurgitated Google results, but if they can really think before they give us our answers. Do they think about if the information is true? Is it helpful? Is it inspiring? Is it nice? And most importantly, is it kind? Think. So if a machine can fool you into thinking it's human during a conversation, maybe that's good enough to say it's intelligent. But as we get into, this thought experiment, we're also going to really, dive into the thought that, is copying human behavior really the same thing as having a mind? You know what I say? Who's to say?
John Searle is to say. And we're going to hear about all of that and all of his thoughts about it.
Lucky us. Minds are a special kind of functional system. So functionalism says that what makes something a mind is not what it's made of, like neurons, but rather what it does, so the function that it performs. So under this view, a mind can be defined by three things. It takes input, so like sensory data or information. It performs processing, thinking, reasoning, learning, and it produces outputs. So actions, speech, decisions. This then brings the question, what functions as a mind? So in theory, if a machine could perform the same functional roles as a human brain, then it might count as having a mind, even if it's made of metal instead of meat. Can machines then think? Humans have infinite competence, so the body and brain obviously break down over time and need breaks to sleep, but hypothetically, if you didn't need to sleep or eat or relax, your brain could function, or your brain has the power for infinite competence. We can generate and understand infinitely many new sentences. We can apply knowledge to infinitely new contexts. And so the human mind just has an infinite range of possible thoughts or mental states. It's not just a fixed or pre-programmed set.
Okay, so to answer this question of do machines have infinite competence? Are they smart? Do they think in the same way that humans do? This guy, Alan Turing. So in 1950, he proposed something called the Turing test. And this was essentially a way to determine whether a machine could think or not. So I'm going to quickly break down what this test is, what it looks like, and then what this means for our central question.
Okay, break it down.
Break it down. So,
Wiki.
in this Turing test, there are 3 participants, right? So there's a human interrogator, a human respondent, and then a computer who's trying to imitate a human. So the interrogator sits in a separate room from the other 2, and it's communicating with both the human and the computer using written messages, so essentially like texting the other 2, through a wall. So they can't see the other 2. The interrogator can't see the human and the computer. They're only getting written messages, and the interrogator must decide which of the 2 unseen participants is the human and which one's the computer. So if the machine can imitate the human so well that the interrogator can't tell the difference, Turing argued that we should say that the machine can think.
Well, by golly, there's no reason to think that it shouldn't.
So the goal of the Turing test is to define intelligence in a way that can be applied to all possible intelligent beings. So this could be a human, it could be a machine. Basically anything that passes the Turing test would be therefore intelligent. Basically, the way that I see this is it's kind of like the 1950s version of catfishing, right?
For philosophers.
For philosophers. Instead of your credit card information, they want your philosophical validation.
Tell us we're intelligent. That's all we want to hear.
So it's also important to note here that passing the Turing test is sufficient, but it's not necessary for intelligence. What this means is that if a machine or a person, if anything were to pass the Turing test, it's good, but if they were to fail it, it doesn't mean that they're unintelligent. So in other words, passing the Turing test is not the only path to being proven intelligent.
Thank God. Okay, but I can't help but wonder why acting like a human is enough to determine or say something is intelligent.
I mean, right. That's a really good point. I think that's a point that a lot of us might land on, and it really leads us into some problems with the Turing test. So, for example, it's the Turing test behaviorism. It essentially judges by human behavior. So, what you just said, it's replacing talk of mentality with behavioral talk. Remember, the question that we're asking is, can machines think, not
Can machines act like humans?
Not can machines act like humans, or can machines act like they're thinking? So if we're asking that question, we're kind of asking something different. The Turing test, in a way, is like judging the couple who's most in love based on Instagram posts. Let me explain this a little bit. Hear me out.
Just leave it at that.
Remember that the Turing test is judging intelligence based on behavior, right? It's judging intelligence based on a performance of intelligence in a way. So if we relate that back to the Instagram example.
I'm so sorry. I just can't stop thinking about if a machine tried to replicate a performative male. Like, that's all I'm thinking about right now. Anonymous manatee, go ahead.
So another way to see the same point is interpreting the Turing test as saying something like, if you act smart, then you are smart. So congrats to every student who's ever nodded along with the teacher, even when they don't know what they're talking about. I know all of you have done that, but congratulations, you're intelligent, according to the Turing test. So another problem with the Turing test that's pretty apparent is that maybe thinking involves feeling something from the inside. So until we can prove that the machine was feeling something from the inside, maybe it wasn't thinking. So we know that the Turing test tells us intelligence can be measured by behavior, right?
Yeah, I think we know that by now.
If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, maybe it's a duck.
Quack, quack.
This guy, John Searle, though, he wasn't convinced by this. He kind of wondered, what if the duck is just really good at reading the rulebook on how to sound like a duck? And that's essentially where the Chinese room comes in. And this is another thought experiment. It's Searle's way of saying imitation isn't the same as understanding.
I'm really excited to talk about this. Okay, I want you guys to close your eyes. This might be really hard for the majority of you to imagine, but you don't know Chinese. Okay? Once you can get that, you don't know Chinese. Now think about this. You're in a room, and you have access to absolutely no outside information whatsoever.
Right.
All you have is a basket of tiles with, you guessed it, Chinese symbols. There's also a rule book for you, so you don't have to do this completely alone. In English, so you can match Chinese symbols with other Chinese symbols. So you need to note that this is not a translation book.
Right.
Because you still don't know what you're saying and you don't understand it. You just have a rule book that tells you, like, what input to put where, essentially.
These symbols could be, like, anything. Like, it doesn't have to be Chinese, and I think that's important.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a language that we can, like, directly translate to another language. It's just symbols that we're putting together.
So you get a message in Chinese, and you manipulate the symbols according to the book to compose a message and send it out. Essentially, you can, like, think about how this is like ChatGPT or any sort of, like, search engine does things. Like, when keywords are plugged in, like, it will take those keywords and essentially assemble information and, like, search through all its logs to find information on the keywords that you said. But we can think about it as doing so through one giant rule book. So our answers are indistinguishable from a native Chinese speaker.
So you're getting the outcome right, you just don't know exactly how you're doing it.
Yeah, so, like, if you were asked how you did it, you wouldn't be able to say.
Mm-hmm.
So the premise of the Chinese room is that this type of functioning is analogous to what a computer does. So if I simply behave like a computer, I perform computational operations on formally specified elements. So Searle claims that the person in this room does not understand Chinese and will never and could never understand Chinese simply by doing this. As a result, manipulating formal symbols is not understanding a language or thinking. It's essentially just doing a bunch of inputs and outputs.
Mm-hmm.
So, since computer programs are formal, whereas human minds have mental content, it's just following instructions to process information like adding numbers, sorting data, and translating languages. It's not actually doing any thinking.
There's a big difference between humans and computers, and that is specifically that computers work with syntax and humans work with semantics. So what he means by this is that essentially computers will follow rules to like handle symbols without actually knowing what the symbols mean. So if you put the word apple into ChatGPT, it doesn't know what an apple is. It's just manipulating data. But humans, on the other hand, we have semantics. So we're actually attaching meanings to words and symbols. So when we think about an apple, we're picturing like its taste or its texture or the way we use it. So if somebody wanted to push back a little bit here against this, there is a rejoinder that is pretty compelling. One might argue the whole system understands Chinese rather than just the single person. You might argue that claiming that the person doesn't understand Chinese is like claiming that a certain part of a computer doesn't understand what it's doing, and that might just be the wrong question to ask. This is called the systems reply, and it says that Searle is focusing too narrowly on the human operator when the cognitive system is actually the entire setup, not just the human in the room. The objection is essentially saying, I don't understand my taxes, but maybe TurboTax and I, as a collective organism, do understand my taxes.
Right.
And this seems pretty compelling. However, these two guys, Braden Mitchell and Jackson, they agreed that claiming that the person doesn't understand Chinese doesn't sound right. So they actually create another thought experiment that focuses on the whole system and still proves that it doesn't understand Chinese. This thought experiment is called the China brain. And to understand this, we're going to take the basic logic of the Chinese room and we're going to kind of make it a little bit wilder.
Okay. Let's see if we can do this.
All right. Braden, Mitchell, and Jackson introduce a situation where the entire population of China is to be imagined as simulating the operations of the brain. So basically every person is following instructions that mimic like neuronal connections. So imagine the entire population of China, like 1 billion or so people. Each person is given a rule book and a telephone or a radio or some way to communicate with the others. They're organized in such a way that their communication mimics the pattern of neuron firings in a human brain. So one person is acting like one neuron. The signals between them are simulating synaptic connections. I mean, you thought getting plans out of the group chat was hard? Together, this gigantic system is functioning like a human brain, right? So it's receiving sensory inputs, it's processing the information, and then it's producing a behavioral output. Now, Braden and Mitchell want you to ask, does this China brain have a mind? Is it a mind? Does the system actually understand the words it produces? If you believe the system's reply, then yes, the whole system, the entire coordinated population of China does understand, even though each individual only follows rules. The China brain thought experiment is meant to stress test functionalism in the way that the scenario illustrates that even if the outputs appear intelligent, the system as a whole does not possess understanding, which is pretty similar to Searle's argument. Mm-hmm. Basically, if you really accept functionalism, then you must accept that a giant coordinated society could literally have a mind.
You're crazy.
Yeah, crazy. If you reject this as absurd, though, you might think that there's something non-functional, like consciousness is a big one, or like inner experience, something that's essential to having a mind that's non-functional.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, computers are great at doing what they're told. They can simulate conversations, translate languages, they can mimic emotion, but according to Searle and John Jacob Jekyllheimer-Smith, they may talk the talk, But, like, we don't know if they can walk the walk. And at the end of the day, isn't that what matters? Being able to walk the walk? But in all seriousness, the Chinese room reminds us that thinking isn't just about inputs and outputs, no matter how much we will it to be. It's about understanding and maybe being even a little bit conscious. So until your laptop suddenly experiences existential dread, we might want to pump the brakes before calling it a mind. Ooh.
People have been arguing about for decades whether machines can really think, and we're definitely still not sure. The truth is, there are tons of arguments for and against this, and we've only scratched the surface. But one thing is clear, there is a big difference between having a conversation and actually knowing what you're saying.
Wait, what?
So next time you're chatting with the chatbot, just remember, it might sound human, but deep down, it's just flipping through the rulebook.
And that's on Cyril.